to see your first impressions. So you may be on red, you may be on amber, like some of those questions you can answer. You may be on
Maths teacher Vicky Inman is testing some headline assessment for learning techniques. Traffic lights and no hands up.
Is it 5 or bigger? Does anyone know the relevance of that question?
But she's no lone wolf.
You've done the experiment.
Over in science, Richard Griffin is experimenting with AFL questioning techniques.
Okay, so if it's more
Here at Valentine's High School in Ilford, the teaching and learning group are rolling AFL out across the whole school.
Well, that's the matters arising, really.
Shirley Forbes was part of the core team that first trialled AFL.
Different departments in the school have taken on different strategies. For example, in English we started with looking at marking because marking is a big issue for English teachers. For science they started looking at peer and self-assessment because it was something that they particularly wanted to address.
Regular workshops give teachers the chance to report back and compare each other's strategies.
What I'm going to do today, we're going to focus particularly on the feedback that we got from the students on key questions and how we can actually use those key questions in lessons and how it can perhaps work together and how we can enhance the way that we use them.
So you take 1 year group, let's just say...
Tonight, they're brainstorming ways of taking lesson objectives, a list of things to be learned, and reframing them as key questions that students should be trying to answer. The aim is to help them be more aware of what and why they're learning.
Would a better question be, why should we simplify the ratios, the units rather?
Yeah, I was thinking for a moment, attitude there, why should we bother? But why? Yeah. 450 to 8 is very different from 450 to 8,000.
And also it gives a bit of meaning to the lesson. They might be thinking, what's the point in this? But if you say, if the key question is why do we simplify it, then all of a sudden it'll be, oh, I see why we do it now. This is why we have to do it. It's not just something they've just had to do. It's got a meaning.
AFL theories sound good, but how easy is it to put them into practice? This morning, Richard Griffin is teaching Year 9 about electrical and chemical energy, with the help of some key questions.
The first question is, why does a battery cell produce electricity? So all we've got, normal lemon with 2 bits of metal in it and 2 clips attached, and we're producing electricity. All right? What do you know about lemons? It's citric. And what's citric? Give it the full name. Citric. Acid. You've got an acid. We put some metals in there. What do you know about metals and acids? They react. So we've got a chemical reaction in there, and it's producing electricity. What you're going to do is a little investigation to find out the effects of changing the metal and looking at fruit juice to find out the effects on electricity.
So he started with key questions, not objectives. But that's not the end of the job. As the pupils get tangled up in the practicalities of the experiment, they lose sight of the key questions. Richard tries focused questioning to get them back on track.
Why does the voltage, different cells have different voltages? You've done the experiment, you've investigated and you've identified what can affect the voltage. We're now going to try and think about why it affects the voltage. Why does it have an effect? So that's our last key question. What would you predict about reactivity and voltage?
That. There's a bigger reaction, the higher voltage.
OK, so if it's if it's a bigger reaction, there'd be high voltage. That'll be your prediction, yeah? So which is your most reactive metal in the list?
Copper.
Try that one again. Which is your most reactive metal in the list?
Magnesium.
No, don't shout out. Magnesium. Which is your least reactive metal?
Aluminium.
You need to go back and look at your lists. They like peer assessment, they like pair working, they like focused questioning. The comment they made, they like focused questioning as long as they're not the person being asked. But they do actually, in reality, they do see the benefits of that, and they think that's a good strategy. OK, you were talking about this, Anuja. Which is your least reactive? Copper, right? So least reactive is copper. Most reactive is magnesium. Does it give you...
The style of questioning is just as important as the questions themselves. Richard gives them plenty of wait time.
Tyrone?
Yeah.
Yes? Sure? I think wait time is really quite important.
Yeah.
Yes? Look at the ones on the board if you're not sure. So often as teachers we ask questions and you're just looking for the right answers and you're just trying to keep the lesson moving. So if a student doesn't give you an answer, then you quickly go to somebody else because you're just looking for the right answer in case you don't get it. I think wait time, what it does, it actually makes students just stop and think and reflect. And what seems a long time actually isn't a very long time, really. It can be 30 seconds. But it actually makes them just stop and get some access to the answer. What did we say was the least reactive?
Copper.
Which we say was the most reactive?
Magnesium.
Right, do they give you the most?
Yeah.
Yeah? Some of the difficulties with the lesson, I think, I was a bit surprised that the students struggled a little bit with getting what I thought the practical itself, and that became a hindrance in progressing the lesson. Really, one of the key points of assessment for learning, it's not about just for students, it's also for teachers, in a sense, and that you are constantly reviewing what you're doing and improving on what you're doing. What I think I might have done if I repeated the lesson would be to spend a little bit more time just helping them to work through what they're actually doing and use the focused questioning and maybe the key questions to actually get them to think a little bit more actually about the experiment. If it's aluminium, it's very floppy and thin.
And you'll see that we're going to work on rounding today.
In the maths department, Vicky Inman is combining some more visible AFL strategies.
The idea of traffic lights is that as a teacher you get a lot more feedback. A teacher will often teach something at the front of the room and say, OK, so do you all understand? Put up your hand, ask, are there any questions? And you never get a response because generally the children don't like to put their hands up and say that they don't understand or whatever it is. So you get a lot of blank faces. You say, right, fine, you all understand. Here we are, do this exercise. And then they'll start working and then then the hands will go up. And individually on a one-to-one, they will say, I don't get it. But you were under the impression that they all understood.
So you may be on red, you may be on amber, like some of those questions you can answer. You may be on green. Let's just look at a first impression. Would everybody just show me the...
If you show a green traffic light, are you on green? It means, yes, I understand it all. I can do the question. I'm confident. I'm happy. An amber traffic light means that you have grasped it a little. You think you could sort of do it, but you're not really, you're not absolutely sure. And a red traffic light means I've got no idea, I don't get it.
We've got a whole range of answers here. We've got people who think they can, people who really aren't sure, and that's fine. OK, great. Put it down. Look at this. See part 1. OK. Write 25.73 to correct to 1 decimal place. You look at the next number and you say, is it 5 or bigger? Does anyone know the relevance of that question? Hands down.
Vic is using traffic lights together with the more controversial no hands up policy.
There's some very enthusiastic students there who are dying to speak out and they find it boring if they can't. So I expect they do get frustrated.
4.9 herein.
As a teacher, you sometimes resort to picking them because you want the lesson to move forward, and it often can be that 5 or 6 students will have a dialogue with the teacher all the way through the lesson and that the other 25 will sit dormant.
525.
If you have no hands policy, then it changes everything because they suddenly realise that they might have to answer a question, whereas before they knew they could go to maths and just sit there and do nothing.
It is to do
They don't necessarily like it, but at that point when you've asked a question, you've got every single student engaged in thinking, what's the answer? I might have to answer it.
You've got your hand up. Lavinia?
Is it because if it's below 5, then you go down, and if it's above 5, then you go to the next number up?
She said that really brilliantly. OK, now we're going to move on to our second objective. So we're going to round numbers to significant figures. Here's an example, right. In a football match, one day on a Saturday, 43,786 people went there. And often they'll be giving the football results and they say there were 44,000 people attending. Why don't they say on the news 43,786 people went there. Why don't they say that? Why don't they say that, Mariana?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
And they mustn't be petrified. Oh, she's going to ask me and I won't know, and there'll be silence and it'll be awful. And that's where phone a friend comes in. So you might give them a few hints. You might be able to bring that child to the point where they can answer the question. But if not, you take the pressure off. Say, OK, why don't you phone a friend?
Why do they all sort of say 44,000? Do you want to pass it on? Do you want to phone a friend?
Hearing.
Hearing?
Will it be
Hands down.
Will it be like they want to round it up to the nearest 1,000?
Those are the words, aren't they? We round it up. So do you see where rounding comes in?
But is it really worth frustrating the vocal, enthusiastic students for the sake of AFL?
The more people you talk to, the more you hear, I hated maths at school, I couldn't do it. And I think it's all about good teaching.
Show me a colour.
I believe everyone can do maths.
Show me a colour. Junaid
Far
as well.
too many
Me as
people,
well.
they've just
Get
got
ready
left
for the
behind.
colour.
And the teachers were not aware of where they were with their learning, and on it went, and they hadn't grasped it, and on it went to the next subject, and they were just left behind.
OK.
With a traffic light, they haven't got to say anything. All they've got to do is choose a colour. The rest of the class can't necessarily see what they've got. And the question is whether they should be small enough to fit in your hand so that you could do it privately if you wanted to, although some people want to create a culture of red being OK, and it is OK, so that's what we have to work on. But it means that every child responds to the teacher, and you know, which is just a massive leap forward compared to a set of blank faces. They liked the fact that we did no hands and traffic lights. It made the lesson a bit different, and that's what they thrive on, variety.
The teaching and learning group are sharing their findings. But even at this stage, there's one thing they're all agreed on.
There's a risk that it becomes a tick list, that you just put your traffic light cards out and you integrate your no hands and you think you're doing assessment for learning. But you're not. You're just layering on another strategy.
Oh, right, OK.
But it's the way teachers integrate the different strategies into their own curriculum that is particularly significant.
Actually, is that several of the lessons people have talked about have actually used AFL techniques without them being explicitly mentioned. We've had sort of peer and self-assessment mentioned, we've had the success criteria mentioned, and that thing about tick, cross, question mark is basically traffic lights, isn't it? And it suggests to me, just listening to that, that a lot of the AFL stuff is already sort of there, embedded, and we're not perhaps even aware of how much we're using it.
I mean, good teachers use questioning. Good teachers are aware of what progress their students are making. And one of the things we found across the school, that when we start talking about assessment for learning, or just talking about teaching and learning, we find a lot of teachers are actually doing the strategies already. And often it's just formalising it.
What we are trying to do is meet the students where their needs are, and so that they're not getting totally left behind. And there's probably a bigger place for assessment and learning in maths than any other subject, but I don't want to jump at my own subject, but it's crucial and it's brilliant.